Welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management, a weekly conversation with area leaders about how to persevere during uncertain times. Now here's your host, Gary Shorman.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. Our guest today is Craig Poe, the new Executive Director at High Plains Mental Health. That's the licensed community mental health center, certified community behavioral health clinic, and the licensed substance abuse disorder treatment program for all of Northwest Kansas. High Plains offers counseling, therapy, substance use abuse treatment, community-based support services, and psychiatric services. So when you talk about leading in challenging times, Craig, our program is probably right down your alley. First, welcome to High Plains and our community here in Northwest Kansas. Good to have you on the program.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the invite and certainly opportunity to get to know you as well as all the other community members as I've traveled around. So,
Well, the mental health industry needs leadership, leaders like you who can help us face, the stressful things that happen. You look across, you hear the headlines. There's so many things going on in the world. You wonder, what the heck what are people thinking? You've moved into this, you've been in the new position, replaced a guy that has been Walt Hill, who's been a longtime administrator at High Plains. How have things been going for you the first 90 days?
they've actually went really well. There's odd paths to get here that might take your whole program if I went into all the details, but replacing somebody that's been here for over 40 years like Walt had and over 20 years in the role that I'm in, you find challenges. You learn more about that individual without even asking them questions, because all of a sudden you're doing the job that they did naturally for that long. And so it's created some definite challenges of me understanding where things are, but my process is to listen and understand before I make changes. And so it's been a lot of fun getting to know my staff and community constituents to understand what we need and how we can serve better.
Let's talk a little bit about your background. People that may not know you, have dealt with a lot of the things, including things like telemedicine, telehealth, those sort of things that have all been a part of what takes place at High Plains, mainly because of the region that we're in. How's the transition been, and have you taken your background and put it into play at High Plains?
Uh, so High Plains was actually in a really great position based on Walt taking the challenges of, we're geographically spread 19,000 square miles in Kansas that we cover. And so televideo was a regular component of that early on. My background going through sales and management and IT and a long stint in human resources gave me a very diverse background in managing people. And so I've been able to lean on my experiences at Pawnee Mental Health in Manhattan, and understanding the televideo challenges and even the pandemic that led all of us down some odd paths with technology and how we could make things work. But my experience has been able to allow me to evaluate each of those different departments, whether it be IT, human resources, any of those operations aspects of the organization, and really hone in on best practices, find ways that we can improve those. We all love in person. I would much rather meet people in person, but the reality is our world is centered around technology. And so there will likely continue to be expansions of how we do televideo services in order to continue to serve. So,
How do you go about that process of improving that, especially where you have some clientele that, and people, maybe put it that way, persons who have trouble with the technology on that other end? How do you improve the in-person part and put it on a telemedicine role or in that position and make it better?
it's a challenge, definitely. But one of the things that I think we will continue to try to work towards is, how do we get everyone to recognize that it's the next best option? Because there are some individuals that are just, we all drive. I grew up in Oakley and understand that you drive to go everywhere. My mom and dad still do that, where it's a long distance travel if you think of big city and environments like that, but it's just normal for Northwest Kansas to drive a distance. And so knowing that there's a lot sparsely populated areas, finding technology to be the solution that does work and having individuals support it, I think is how we get to that next level where the clients that need the services aren't negative about them if individuals are saying, well, isn't it great that you can connect with a therapist? We have a individual working for us that's done research for Johns Hopkins. Obviously does not live in Kansas, and probably wouldn't be able to hire somebody at that level to come and live in Northwest Kansas, but they have access to that level of psychiatry because of televideo services. And so that idea of promoting the resources that we have, our school districts, there are over 40 school districts within Northwest Kansas, and we're in every one of them in some way. And that televideo component is the way that that's managed. And so the advantage of a student being able to walk down the hall and see their therapist or their psychiatrist and go right back to school is a huge advantage that just wouldn't happen without televideo. And so I think it's changing the narrative about it that improves it.
Oh, that's, one thing important for people to recognize. It's one thing to say, I got to see somebody in person, but if you physically can't get there for whatever reason, or it's not convenient, or the stigma that goes along with that causes people not to get the help, the telemedicine thing may be a better thing in a school where you can actually sit in a room where it doesn't have that kind of feel that I have to go to the doctor. I just want somebody to talk to. And I hope that message is getting across. Today is better to do it than it is to wait 3 weeks or 2 months to get in just so you can see somebody in person.
Yeah, 100% agree. And we do have options, and we'll continue to try to provide more options for some in-person services. But the continued care and the spread out nature of what we have. And you're right, you hit on an advantage where if somebody doesn't want anyone to know that they're seeking services, what better way to do that than to have a private conversation on a phone or a tablet away from everybody where no one knows what you're doing. So
What do you see as the long-term goal that you're looking at for High Plains mental health? Because it's not going to get less. There's going to be more challenges ahead. But what do you see going forward?
we have a lot of transition that is very good. I don't think anybody could tell me that the need for mental health services has not continued to increase through the last few years of some very interesting times for our society. And that model of CCBHC, as you mentioned on the intro, that Certified Community Behavioral Health Center is designed to provide greater access to services and greater connection between all health. So not just mental health, but are you monitoring your diabetes, because it will have an impact on mental health issues, and coordinating those services so that we interact better. This is all new, so we're certainly building, but I think the vision of where we're going is to provide greater access, lower stigma, and more acceptance of this treatment that is needed for all individuals. One of the new and exciting things that we're doing is pursuing a crisis intervention center. We have to find a way to fund this and a way to put it in place. But a crisis intervention center is a access for voluntary and involuntary admissions of adults with mental illness, substance abuse, or co-occurring conditions, and it'd be for emergency evaluation and treatment for up to 72 hours. We have a voluntary facility right now and named the Schwaller Center here in Hayes, but this facility offering that involuntary admission concept is vital to growth in this area and getting services that people need. Right now, individuals that are in mental health crisis or substance abuse crisis are spending time in emergency rooms and jail cells because there isn't an adequate place for them to go. And this crisis intervention center would represent a whole different level of care that's necessary for them to improve on their outcomes.
Craig, what's it take for that to happen with not only area hospitals, but, you mentioned jail cells, somebody gets arrested somewhere, they need that help. What are the next steps to make that happen, or at least to make it happen easier than what it is today?
So we were able to take a grant from the state of Kansas that we are exploring this concept through exploring the financial aspects of how would we build and add a space like this, exploring the staffing concept and how many beds we would need. But the long-term issue is how do we coordinate transportation? We talked about 19,000 square miles. So we need to find funding and the ability to stand up a facility and put the staff in place. We also need to find a way to get them here. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges is communicating what the center provides and providing easier transportation to get here, whether you're in St. Francis or Sharon Springs or any of the places that are much farther away from Hayes. That becomes a challenge to get people all the way here.
At that space, when you say you grew up in Oakley, that space between here and there is very challenging, and
Yep.
and having the in person when it's in a crisis mode is entirely different. So I want to take a break and come back and talk a little bit about the options there, how to connect with what you do, and also talk about the future of mental health because I hear a lot more about that and whether we're making any progress towards erasing some of the stigma involved with that. Our guest today is Craig Poe, who is the new executive director at High Plains Mental Health. Back with more after this.
The most successful investors are those that can keep their emotions in check and take a longer-term view at what portfolios will be worth 3 to 5 years down the road. I'd say that's the most important in determining what investor outcomes are. Market corrections will continue in the future. We've seen many of them over the years, only to see equity prices rise higher, and that'll be the case in the future.
Worth Wealth Management, enhancing lives and strengthening families.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Forward Ever, leading in challenging times. If there's anything, I guess there's not anything probably more challenging out there right now than dealing with mental health issues. And we see that across the board, whether it be on the national news or in our local news. Right now, Craig Poe, the new executive director at High Plains Mental Health, is with us. We're talking about that a little bit. And Craig, we went into the break talking about the stigma that's around mental health. Is that whole stigma improving? Is there a way to make that say, you need help, a family member, you see them, they're struggling. Is that getting better?
I think it is. It probably depends on who you talk to and their level of patience of whether we're far enough along or whether we just can't wait to get there. But reducing that stigma is something that happens within each of us. We have an experience. We have a empathy for somebody that has had a mental health crisis or an acute depression episode, and they recognize that if we just had someone to talk to, we just had somebody to improve and run even just the general idea of, hey, I want to know that what I'm thinking is normal. And we all do that every day of our lives. And the more we have impacts on our individuals in the community, but especially our young people, to recognize and understand that mental health is no different than our physical health. It's harder for us to grasp because we can't see it. I can see if somebody's arm is broken, but I can't see if they're suffering with depression. And the treatment is, of course, through different specialties, but you wouldn't go to a orthopedic surgeon to work on your mental health. And so it's just recognizing that there is other specialties and there is other ways to get the help that you need. I think will continue to reduce the stigma. In some ways, I believe even different parts of the state are going to have different pockets of reduced stigma. Living in Manhattan for as long as I have, I grew up in Oakley, but went to K-State and never left until just now. And I'm amazed at I used to say 2 teenage daughters, but one of them just turned 20. And the interactions with them and their friends and family, they are much more open about conversations of people going to therapy, people having conversations. And it starts with them. If the youth do not have a stigma about discussing mental health issues, it's going to grow and expand and help all of us to recognize that sometimes you just need a little help. We think of the community coffee shops and things like that where people have met for years. The exact same thing was happening. It's just not labeled as mental health then, but you're checking in on somebody, you're bouncing ideas off of each other, you're making sure what you think is normal. And we all need that reassurance. And I think we'll continue to move towards that as we move forward.
And many times it's not the individual themselves, it's their friends, their maybe neighbor, somebody that they have a relationship with, to say, hey, would you go check this out? What's a good way for somebody to encourage somebody? Because we're going to talk about not only your website, you have a website, but you have some access lines for people to get connected. But many times it's the friends, family, et cetera, that help people get to the right spot.
It is. And just our general information line can certainly get them there, 785-628-2871. But we also have an emergency crisis line at 1-800-432-0333. And both of those lines will get you directly to High Plains. But if you have not heard of the national movement of moving to 988, similar to 911, but 988 for mental health crises, that will connect to a network of individuals that can either talk to someone about how to approach an individual, or the individual themselves calling in mental health crisis and get in contact with clinical services directly from just dialing 988.
You hear people that, kind of go off the rails and bad things can happen. And I guess as a friend or a neighbor, whatever, if you see something that's not right, is 988 the number to call, or is there a better way to get connected? Just say, hey, what do I do because I'm seeing this? Because a lot of times that person is not going to make the call. The person in need really is not the one going to make the first call.
Yes. And 988 is a great resource for that. You can certainly call our center and talk to us directly, but the national call center of 988 is designed for that purpose. Do you have a question about what you should do? Do you have a individual that needs some help and you're not sure how to approach that? Call them and ask questions.
Well, Craig, it's great to have you as part of our community here. I know you're a Wildcat by nature. Do you also like to work with Jayhawks and Tigers?
They all put their pants on the same way, and I can interact with them if I have to. But no, I've had friends of all the different mascots throughout my life. But I don't know where it would even be 5th, 6th, 7th generation talking about K-State. So it's very hard not to bleed purple, but I'll still support other people's choices, I suppose.
Well, I know you'll do a great job with this, and looking at your background, you'll fit in over there and be a part of what's going on. I hope later on we can, maybe later this year, have a chance to talk about your progress, what you're doing, what's taking place, because it's so important to our community to have a good basis for mental health. And that means agriculture, that's a big part of it. People in agriculture with issues, to teens, to the older adults in our community, need a resource, need a place to go.
Absolutely.
Craig, thanks for joining us today. Craig Poe is the new executive director at High Plains Mental Health. And you, thanks for listening to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. It's brought to you by Worth Wealth Management, where you can live with confidence. I'm Gary Shorman.
Thanks for joining us for Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management. Join us right here next week for another episode with host Gary Shorman. Until then, remember to move forward ever, backward never.